Hello, my name is Emily Beynon and today I'm going to talk about Petrushka. Stravinsky's ballet Petrushka was written between his other two Ballet Russe masterworks, The Firebird of 1910 and The Rite of Spring in 1913. But in the concert hall these days, you're probably more likely to come across his 1947 version, and that's the one I'll be working from today. It's a superb ballet. The story tells of a love triangle between three puppets. Our protagonist, Petrushka, a ballerina and a Moor, and it has a pretty gruesome end. So if you haven't seen it yet, do start by watching that. The colours and characters will help you enormously in your preparation of this piece. I'll put a link up here and the information below for you to watch later. The entire flute part is utterly exhilarating to play, and it's filled with lots of little flute solos here and there. But today I'm going to focus on the three excerpts which are most likely to appear in an orchestral audition. At the very beginning of the piece, we're at the Shrovetide Fair in St. Petersburg in 1830. That's the period before Lent, which is associated with merrymaking, the excess before abstinence. Think of Carnival or Mardi Gras. So you can imagine all the hustle and bustle of people coming together from all over to dance, sing, eat and drink, and the stallholders all crying out for attention. At the opening of the piece, the first cry we hear is the flute. Buy your toffee, toffee. And you'll notice that the emphasis is on the to, not on the fi. The small note should take the most energy. The long note is long enough to take care of itself. I would say that the accents and the ben marcato are the most important aspects here. Bear in mind it's only forte, and later on we have fortissimo and then three Fs. And by the way, I think that first D should probably have an accent too. So when I play this in the orchestra, I make sure I pull out my head joint quite a long way for the beginning, and I would recommend you doing the same in an audition. We're looking for a very bright sound and clear articulation with an extremely precise rhythm and a clear difference between the eighth notes, the triplet eighth notes and the 16th notes. And look out for the misprints. In the fourth bar of figure 1, the rhythm should be the same as the very first two notes, long, short. And then in the next bar, of course, we should have two B naturals, not B flats. And make sure that the two bars before figure 2 are really well-controlled 16th notes, not a tremolo. Then in this next section, aside from the dangers of being too sharp on the top G, we've got quite a complex rhythm, so make sure that you can say it before you play it. Now I've got two little fingering tips to share with you here. I play the top C natural as a top B natural without the thumb. That's the trill fingering from the top B to C. It's much better in tune. And then on this triplet, B flat to C, this fingering might look very complicated, but once it's in your system, it's super easy. You just flick your thumb off the key for the top C. Both these fingerings take a lot of air, so make sure that you really use those two bars rest at figure 3 to breathe deeply. There are two particular little rhythmic details I'd like to draw your attention to. Firstly, one bar before figure 5, here, even though it doesn't look like it, I think these should be played as 8 even notes. And then one bar before 7, even though this triplet looks the same as the ones in the previous two bars, if you figure it out, it should actually be 20% faster. At figure 7, the Master of Ceremonies appears on the balcony, and this is just one of the many Russian folk songs which Stravinsky quotes in Petrushka. So then the fair continues to bustle on, an organ grinder appears, a dancer, and then another dancer with a music box, all with quite soloistic flute parts. And then suddenly two drummers loudly summon everyone to the puppet theatre for the show. And then the puppeteer, or charlatan or magician as he's sometimes known, makes his appearance. The contrabassoon barks out in shock, and amongst the other scared reactions we hear the slithering chromatic bassoons and the shuddering strings. Once the magician has everyone's attention, he produces a flute and begins to play, casting the crowd under his spell. Actually, when you watch the ballet, you'll see that the choreography shows the crowd swaying in time to the music. The puppeteer is perhaps playing with the crowd as he would a puppet. At the end, where it's marked più piano in the flute part, we see that a young girl has been completely mesmerised. But just before the orchestra comes in again, she's snatched away. That's the F with the accent before the final E flat. So, meanwhile, back in the audition, don't forget to push your head joint back to the normal position, having pulled it out for the beginning, and maybe even write that in your part. Whatever seems normal and natural in your practice room can mysteriously whiz right out of your head in a more pressured situation. So we start with perhaps a musical representation of the swoosh of a magician's cape. And here I would interpret the low D, piano with an accent, as being P for powerful. In other words, a healthy mezzo forte, so that you can release the sound, not sostenuto, and then you've still got space to make the diminuendo up to the top B flat. And this is, of course, likely to be a little flat, especially at the end of a diminuendo, so I practice it using a sharp fingering. I wouldn't use this fingering for a concert necessarily, but I practice it so that I get used to hearing that B flat with a slightly higher pitch. Now at this point, I do want to show you how very different the cadenza was in the 1911 version. Originally it was written in 6/8, and on each long note there was a pause, and as far as I know there was no metronome indication. But fast forward 36 years, and Stravinsky had probably heard many performances where the solo flute player was rather too indulgent. So in the 1947 version, he writes poco più mosso and adds the metronome mark of 60. Let's look at the phrase structure underneath the cadenza. Taking the first 4 bars, we have the B flat octave, then a stretch to the C, and then back to the tonic E flat. Then another B flat octave, and this time we stretch to the 7th, the D, before returning to the tonic E flat. And look out for that little tenuto on the C after the top D, as if you're reluctant to leave the D. We return to that D, and then the C falls to the B flat, the dominant, lots of expectation, and then we have this magical più piano. And there's no one else playing, so you can really risk playing that very softly. The only danger being that you might be too flat on the B flat, so keep that nice and high, especially bearing in mind we've got a crescendo to the top G 2 bars later, which is quite a sharp note. And shortly after this passage, the wizard brings the 3 puppets to life. The first wave of his magic wand is in the flute part, and then the ballerina and Petrushka are brought to life by the piccolo. Here in this third excerpt, we find Petrushka in his cell feeling very sorry for himself and pining after the ballerina with whom he's in love. Stravinsky writes, piano dolce espressivo, so super expressive sound and clear phrasing. Practice the melodic line without the grace notes first, so you get a strong sense of how you want to shape this. We've got 3 pairs of bars. I'd like to propose that the first repetition, the 2nd bar, being slightly more, then with the 2nd repetition, or the 4th bar, I would diminish slightly so that the end of the phrase, the 3rd pair of bars, you can develop and open out the phrase, giving clear direction, but without becoming too close to forte. Then just at the very end, I would sneak in a cheeky little diminuendo to that surprise C natural. Now regarding the grace notes, of course there are many different possible interpretations, but I really see the small notes as being grace notes in the sense of folk music articulation, the way one would playing the bagpipes. So keep the singing line through the 8th notes and the fingers just disturb the airstream in the form of articulation. Here's a link to a Russian bagpipe player. Have a listen. From figure 106, we're marked a little louder, now mezzo forte cantabile espressivo, and we have a duet with a very high bassoon. I like to try and give this a natural lilt by lifting the 2nd and 4th 8th notes ever so slightly. So it's sung, but non-sostenuto. And take care that you don't play too loudly at 107, there the piccolo takes over the main voice for 1 bar. There are lots of other lovely passages when you play this in the orchestra. For example, the little mini cadenza moment, and then the beautiful waltz with the trumpet, the pas de deux between the ballerina and Amor. But if you're playing the entire orchestral part, look out for this rather exposed and dangerous moment with the piccolo. It's at the very end when the Moor finally kills Petrushka with one fell swoop of his scimitar. And there comes to an end the colourful and tragic tale of Petrushka. I hope you've enjoyed this. See you next time.